All right, we have local board. We had one request received in time from Kath Handley, Chair of the Waiheke Local. A hero of many people in the room.
Unbeknownst to me before I arrived. Kia ora, Chair, tēnā koutou katoa, Mayor, kia ora. This has been a long time coming. It's been coming since the Hauraki Gulf Islands District Plan was introduced. For me, I just want to say first, you may not even have read the motion. It wasn't our motion, which was passed last Wednesday. It was an original motion, wasn't posted until last night. So if you read your papers before that, and I hope now that you will find that attachment with our motion, because it goes to the heart of what we're looking for here. The reports we received last week are not the reports you have in front of you with respect to either that from Council's Planning Policy Unit or the Helicopter Activity Compliance Monitoring findings. Our discussion with the writers of both those reports have led to changes, material changes, which we of course only received when we got the paper as you did yesterday. The paper, particularly from the Council's Planning Policy Units, is written to lead you to a conclusion which is based on subjective judgment statements and repeated use from the monitoring report of misrepresentative data. Notwithstanding the flaws in that report, the Waiheke Local Board acknowledges the changes that have been written into the new reports. But we've been working on this, as has our community. So the local board, by the way, endorses Quiet Sky Waiheke, and their report was attached to our motion so that you could not miss it. There are only 2 local boards based out in the Gulf on islands, and we have one councillor around this table who also lives on an island. But the future of this issue rests with people who don't live there. So I would like you, please, to engage with what those of us who represent the people of the Waiheke Island Local Board and Aotea Great Barrier are saying. It's really critically important now that we don't follow planner speak, but we listen to people speak. Today we're asking you to take a position and affirm some actions to put right some significant shortcomings since the introduction of the Hauraki Gulf Islands Plan, and adopt a commitment to 2 critical national standards that Auckland Council is yet to adopt. You've heard the arguments from Quiet Sky Waiheke for the adoption of the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement of 2010. The other standard is the National Planning Standard published on the 1st of 2019, Policy 15, Noise and Vibration, 4 years ago. We've been formally seeking options to deal with noise and vibration with you since late 2021. This National Policy Standard, I'll call it MPS 15, has never been proposed by Plans and Places and formal feedback to our board or to your previous planning committee, rather telling us why everything we ever suggested was impossible or too expensive, which itself is subjective. In March 2022, you were told that. It's always been possible, and last week when pushed, we got the answer that it could take as little as 2 weeks to implement. Nobody told you and nobody told us. I was the person who got this on their agenda because I persisted last year. I wrote, I asked, I got no answers, nothing. Finally, I engaged with Councillor Darby as chair of the committee, and eventually I got a response in writing. Yes, it is possible to implement MPS 15. But let's wait until after we get the helicopter compliance report, which has nothing to do with it. Like the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement languishing in Council's policy cupboard since 2010, this national standard immediately calls into question many of the consents that have been approved over this period since MPS 15 was published. It could have been offered but was not. It's cheap, fast and actually fair. It is the national standard. And just briefly, if you haven't come across it yet in the papers, it says you can't average noise over 3 days. Oh, surprise. Noise happens in real time. So a helicopter landing and takeoff might be affecting you to the tune of about 85 or 86 decibels. But measured over 3 days, it's going to come in, if it's only done once, under 50 decibels. That's the difference. So nationally, they decided that was rubbish and got away with it, but we never changed anything. Last year, Doc, at my invitation, came and talked to us about the work they're doing on the experience and expectation of tranquility. They measure it scientifically. And we invited members of the planning committee and we invited the planners, and the planners have not taken this account into their report. It is the expectation of tranquility and the experience of it that are at the heart of the expectations of people living and visiting Hauraki Gulf Islands compared to living anywhere in the city. The central premise of the local board plan, signed off and approved by the council, is that Waiheke is a sanctuary in the Gulf. We're all obliged as elected members to fulfil that premise. The helicopter movement review notes it was conducted over the quietest periods of COVID. It introduces you to the notion that actually Waiheke is only affected by 3% of helicopter movements. That is rubbish. That is meaningless. That is measured. That measure says, where did that helicopter spend the longest time in air? And guess what? Coming from the North Shore, it flew right over the North Shore and then it landed on Waiheke and took off from Waiheke. But only the North Shore is recorded in that piece of data. I don't even know why that is reproduced. During the peak season, it goes on, and now this is in the main report. It says, during the peak season, there were more helicopter flights to and over Waiheke than there were over the rest of Auckland. But the rest of Auckland does not have an expectation of an experience of tranquility. You won't even hear a helicopter at 1,000 feet. So even in midwinter, 28% of all flights landed on Waiheke or flew over Waiheke. I asked you to look at one diagram. It's on page 87 in item 9, attachment A. Look at where the lines cluster. That's just a single diagram of a day. They cluster over us. We've had enough. The options presented aren't options. You can actually run 2 options at once. I know that, I don't even think ART Great Barrier's motion is up with you yet, but you'll get it. They're actually asking for something quite different to us, but mostly the same. But you can do these things together. This report says that the cost is too expensive. Well, guess what? We've all invested huge amounts of time. You have, I go through every helicopter helipad consent application and spend hours trying to demonstrate things like the fact the residents next door are going to be affected, the fact that native birds are going to be impacted. You know, we've got 2 consents just in the last period right beside our only marine reserve. On the margin of that marine reserve, the helicopter comes in right over the marine reserve and lands on the edge of it, and the owner went for 2 consents and got them. We have had enough. Today, please, listen to the islands. Listen to what it's like. Our experience and our expectation of tranquility is destroyed. Look at what it says in that report about climate change. It says, oh, by the way, it's only 7% of transport emissions. So, hey, that's chicken feed. Well, actually, do you know how much a helicopter uses? Each helicopter produces 950 pounds of CO2 per hour and burns over 40 times the fuel of a passenger car per hour. That qualifies them as one of the most polluting, carbon-intense modes of transport. Every time a helipad is consented additional flights are consented. So go on consenting helipads and go on building our carbon footprint. It's outrageous that 7% of emissions would be minimised like this in a report to you when you're committed to reduction of CO2 in our atmosphere, when we're already one of the dirtiest cities in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Handley, and just in case anyone challenges me, I did let you go 4 minutes over, but I know that you are speaking for other boards and a big community, and you've done a huge, phenomenal amount of work in this space. And also thank you for inviting Deputy Chair, Councillor Dalton and I over to the island, and yeah, so thank you very much. I would like to move, we'll have questions actually, so I think Councillor Darby first and then Councillor Lee after.
Kia ora, Kath, and thanks for your impassioned plea. It's not the first one, it's probably about the 10th at least. Can you just give us an idea of how many times have you seen a paper on your agenda at the Waiheke Local Board on this matter? How many hundreds of hours do you think you've spent on this? And then going forward from that, I mean, what is the risk? And realistic, because I know you don't colour things up unnecessarily. What do you think the risk is of judicial challenge by your community or possibly even your own board, Kath? That was the first part. I'll give you the second one too, Kath. Carson Field is pretty central on the island, not like the ferry terminal. From Carson Field, which is a commercial heliport and aerodrome, from there, how long does it take, and can you get to the extreme parts of the island, so the west and back to the east, or right up to the northwest, by hire car or other vehicles? Is that all available? I'm just getting a sense of proximity to the commercial services that go there.
So the first is, I think, highly likely. You know, the longer this runs and the more ridiculous it gets, the more likely it is. Just as we've seen, I've got to say there is, just to explain this, a significant helipad on Waiheke is excluded from the data, by the way, because it was a subject of a legal case at that time, and the findings are against this particular owner of the helipad. The neighbours of that helipad spent over $1 million trying to control not just the helipad, it involved a restaurant and some other behaviours. So yes, there are people, and those are people who you would consider live in a relatively expensive part of Waiheke, Church Bay. But they were prepared to do it because of their expectation. They've invested in living on a lifestyle block, the people who've done this. They've invested to live there and to live a life of relative quiet. So I would say very high, and I think highly challengeable, as are, I believe, the way that the Hauraki Gulf Island District Plan has chosen to be, how it informs, how council has chosen to, what the matters of discretion that council planners have determined they can consider. So that is put outside. It doesn't matter how often I raise the planning standards, they're just outside the terms of reference that have been determined by council planners to be part of discretionary consideration. So that's the first answer. If you were to land at the airfield, and I have to say that is on one of the busiest flight paths for multiple other helipads and the Westpac Helicopter Trust, that has not been consulted in this. And I know the Chief Executive of the Northern District Helicopter Trust, which includes the Westpac Helicopter for Auckland, they are concerned. They are concerned because of the huge frequency of helicopter flights on the same flight path as both the airfield and the Westpac helipad. But if you arrived at the airfield, Carson's airfield, by car 20 minutes to any point, so it's because it's right in the heart, and it really only takes 20 minutes to get to the other end of the island, what we call the eastern end or the bottom end of the island.
Thank you, Kath. Councillor Lee.
Thank you very much, Kath, and thanks for the compelling presentation. In terms of the long overdue adoption of National Planning Standard 15 in the Hauraki Gulf Islands District Plan, would there be any concern that this would in effect align Waiheke and Aotea Great Barrier with the situation in the city? And as we're hearing from people in the city, that is not actually satisfactory. What's your view on that?
Oh, gosh. Now that, to be honest, I haven't looked at it from the perspective of the people in the city, so I don't find that easy to answer. They haven't asked for what we've asked for, which, so I think that would be a case for you to discuss with them, but on National Planning Standard 15, we're all aligned. Yes, just to introduce it for $5,000, just get it done, because that's a simple one. For us, it is the Hauraki Gulf Islands District Plan, and it is different for those seeking, I think this needs to be said, the reason that we aren't seeking a prohibited status for Waiheke is that we have been told very clearly that the demands that would be made on proof and to get there, or the evidentiary nature of moving to being prohibited, is on a scale way beyond what we are seeking. So we are seeking, if you like, to move things into a discretionary and or introduction of the standards rather than restricted discretionary, so that anything can move something into being a notified consent and contestable by the public. And it's really only because we've been told it's to reach the threshold of evidence for prohibited is way too expensive. So we've heard that.
This is advice from who?
From planning. Plans and places. Plans and places, so.
Okay,
yeah.
From the council,
From
council staff.
council, yeah.
So there's, I'll just make the point that the Aotea Great Barrier Board heard the same advice,
Yeah.
and they're saying that the national planning standard is an interim step. It's certainly supported with urgency, but it's only an interim step, and they believe that the best answer would be prohibited activity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can see that for the intention of the Hauraki Gulf Island District Plan is really interesting, because it immediately in the helicopter section says that there are 2 islands where you can only have 1 helipad, and it names those islands. It then goes on to say at the end, there is a postscript saying that actually for Rakino Island, which is also one of our, within Aotearoa, that Rakino should also only have 1, and that any helipads, and I'm coming to the point here, any helipads contemplated for Rakino, if they were to be approved prior to council indicating where the 1 helipad was, they can only be done on a time limit, they'll be time limited. Well, guess what? There is already 1 helipad there, and we'll be looking at that consent to see if it's time limited. And just in the last 2 weeks, we've had 2 more applications for Rakino. And when I wrote to the planner about those, he said, actually, gosh, yes, those are points we need to consider. I think that the Hauraki Gulf Islands District Plan, when it was written, it contemplated a minimum number of helipads to make the islands accessible in one way by helicopter. They didn't contemplate this. This, you saw it, the map.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kate.
Thank you, Councillor Lee and Chair Handley. Councillor Ferry, you have a question.
Thank you very much for this, and acknowledging, the Carson Field is right in the middle of the island. So thank you for that question, Councillor Darby. I had 2 questions. One goes to the image that you pointed us to that was in the papers with the lines. Very powerful image. And when Dirk spoke before from Herne Bay, he mentioned that a lot of the helicopters don't have their transponders on. Yep. And so I just wanted to understand that image, is that covering every helicopter, or will there be a lot of data potentially missing from that?
Oh, that's
my
a really
first
good question. It could exclude some data, but I can't speak to that particular diagram.
Okay.
But our experience over the last years is as soon as helipad, this became an issue, transponders were turned off.
Right.
So, and that's because then we couldn't track them. So I hear a helicopter, I did this morning and I looked for it and it wasn't on the flight radar.
Right. Yeah.
It's still happening, but probably not to the same extent since Council introduced the compliance report and everybody knew in the industry that there was somebody doing a retrospective review of compliance. So they are more compliant now, I believe, but regardless, and Council has now, when they give a new consent for a helipad, included that they must have transponders on as a consent condition to the helipad, and it's up to the owner of the helipad to ensure that. But yeah, if you're looking retrospectively, you could be missing all sorts of data.
Yeah.
But regardless, that's a compelling diagram. It just shows you where we're living. You know, apocalypse now. Well,
Yeah.
Brilliant. Right in the middle of a precious environment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other query I had, was the other point I thought you made, which was particularly compelling, was about the climate impact and the emissions from the helicopters. And I guess there's a question for council here about, if we're discouraging private car use and giving incentives for other means of transport, are we sort of, I guess, setting a bit of a double standard when we allow people to use a vehicle that's actually much
Sorry,
more emitting?
Mr. Chair, I'm finding it very hard to hear the question because of the chat around the table.
Yeah.
Apologies.
Yes, sorry. So the question was in relation to if we're, as a council, incentivising people not using private cars, but it seems there's a bit of double standard here around helipads that we're sort of saying actually, yeah, you can have a helipad at your place though, even though those are much higher emission vehicles.
Yep.
So I just wondered what your reflection was on that.
I think it was probably in the tone I used at the time, Councillor Ferry, which is it is absolutely a double standard. You're either committed to reductions in CO2 or not, and at the moment they're not using. There will be electric flights, but we've got Carsons. Carsons are already moving into that zero carbon space as an airfield. They're looking to achieve that. And eventually we'll get there, I'm sure, with helicopters. But for now, a consent for a helipad is a consent for helicopter use on multiple occasions. So yes, that's a consent for using an incredible amount of CO2 emitting an incredible amount of CO2 per person travelling.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Filipaina.
Thank you, Chair. Tēnā koe, Kath, how are you?
Talofa lava.
Mahalo sui fua. I know you would have read item 10 that's on our agenda with the options that are available to this particular committee. There is a preferred option that's there. I'll be interested to see what your views are in regards to option 3.
We've proposed in our motion that option 2 is just adopted, that's National Planning Standard 15, if I'm remembering correctly, because I don't have it in front of me. And that option 3 is a revision of some of the Hauraki Gulf Island District Plan provisions. So we are asking for option 3 as well for a whole raft of reasons. So if you went to the attachment with our motion in it, it gives a laundry list of reasons to make the change to the Hauraki Gulf Island District Plan as well, but it's going to take longer. So if we introduce MPS 15 now, that would immediately have prevented some of the helipads that have been consented. If you go, Waiheke and Oniroa Beach, one of the most delightful places to be, surrounded by some housing and some bush. And at the top of the bush now, a helipad and the flight path straight in over all those boaties, including the mayor, down in the harbour and over, and over the village, and able to take off and land at will, even though most of the time they won't be able to use that flight path because of the prevailing conditions, so they'll come in over the houses. So that's because our flight path it's a nominal thing, right? It's pilot's discretion whether you use the flight path because of weather conditions.
And Kath, just through you, Chair, just last part, look, on 61, in the agenda, there is a section in here that states this option would significantly change. This is in regards to option 3. I just want to get your view to see whether this is correct or not. That to change the HGI plans helipad rules as sought by the Waiheke and Aotea Great Barrier local boards. Would that statement be correct?
Sorry, I'm going to have to find...
It's just got here. I'll read it to you. I just wanted to see whether that particular statement would be correct, and that is, this option would significantly change the HGI plans helipad rules as sought by the Waiheke and Aotea Great Barrier local boards. That's option 3. I just wanted to see whether that would be a true statement.
That is correct.
Thank you.
That is what we have been seeking, but please look, I'm speaking, I can't speak for Aotea Great Barrier, but please look at their motion, because for reasons which are to do with mana whenua, protecting their environment as well, they are wanting option 4, I understand, but, I won't be able to speak to that. But yes, that is correct.
Kia ora, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Fine, Mr Chairman. Aotea Great Barrier Local Board support option 4, prohibited activity status.
No, I've read the report, Councillor Lee. I just wanted to get at least an answer from Kath in regards to that particular section. I've read the report, but thank you so much for your clarification.
You need to read the resolutions of the Aotea Great Barrier Local Board.
I've read everything, Councillor Lee. I just wanted a response. Thank you so much for your help.
Everyone. Kia ora, Chair Hanley, that's all the questions we have. Thank you for all your feedback we do have, and I'm happy to, if you're sticking around for lunch, discuss some of the thoughts I've had. Obviously, with option 2 with urgency is definitely, we're going to change that to urgency, and then looking at how we can incorporate option 3 as soon as possible. That's sort of looking like where we're heading with some other additional things around making it easier on the council website, things like that. I will say that I'm not putting up the prohibited as a chair's rec at this stage. That may come up as amendment, but because of the advice we have, that nigh impossible to do that, and but that may come up in debate. So I'll discuss with Councillor Lee and Councillor Darby and maybe yourself in the lunch break if you're around. So,
Tātoko, Chair, and thank you, everybody.
Kia ora. So Councillor Lee, I assume very highly that you would like to move the recommendation. I'll get Councillor Darby to second because of his work on this as well. All those in favour?
Aye.
Any opposed? No, thank you. Right, we move to extraordinary